Welcome to the SRS Podcast. I'm your host, Aaron J. Babyar, and I'm the Training Director of Support Raising Solutions. Whether you're a new ministry worker or a veteran looking to increase your competence and confidence, Support Raising Solutions seeks to bless you in your quest to be a spiritually healthy, vision-driven, fully funded Great Commission worker. My guest this morning is, now I would say an old friend. We've known each other for probably 6 or 7 years, and he serves as a missionary overseas. We're going to call him Tony, just to really protect the innocent, but also protect the guilty. Tony is not on here today to try and embarrass anyone, but we are going to talk about Poor Talk. And if you're not familiar with Poor Talk, it is a concept, an idea, an application of actually using your mouth and disparaging your finances and other things related to the money that you need for living off of and doing ministry. And my friend Tony is here to basically share some of the things that he has learned and seen over many years of ministry. He finds himself going in and out of what is referred to as closed countries on a regular basis. So that's the other reason we're not saying exactly who he is or exactly where he's from. But Tony, my friend, it is good to have you join me on the SRS podcast today. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Aaron. It's great to be here. Thanks for the invitation.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you, we need to keep a lot of your personal information general. What is the type of work that you're in? And as general as you can, share with our audience about what it is that you do.
Sure. Yeah. Well, a big part of what we do is I would just generally call it mission education. You know, we're involved in helping to teach people more about how God's at work in the world and practical ways that we as the church can be involved. And so everybody, no matter where they're from, where they're living, everyone has an active role to play in the Great Commission. So we're just involved in helping to spread that message, that news, and invitation to get everybody involved in some kind of meaningful way.
Yeah, awesome. Well, Tony, I know that your family originally is based out of the United States, but you live in a far-flung country. We'll leave it at that. And I know you get the opportunity to work with missionaries from a lot of different agencies and cultures and organizations. And so you have a unique perspective as well as opportunity to do some interesting and even entrepreneurial type missional work. But with that, you come across a lot of different missionaries, don't you?
That's certainly true. And, it's a great joy to get to work with so many wonderful men and women from all around the world, really. It's just awesome to see how God's people converge together around this great task of taking the gospel out to the nations. And but it is also true, like you say, though, I mean, so many organizations have a unique culture, an organizational culture, and that really defines in many ways how they speak about their work, how they speak about fundraising too.
With that, with interacting with different people, I don't know of really any organization that I've come across that hasn't at some level, if their people are raising and living off support, they haven't at least at some level had to address the topic of poor talk. Now, they might not call it poor talk. They might use a different phrase, but the reality is poor talk is something that it's a little bit like a poison. It can really get into and affect people's their heads and their hearts, and even how they think about finances and how they think about ministry, how they think about their teammates, how they think about just a lot of different things. And so as we're here to dig in on this today, let's start right there. You get to see and interact with a lot of different missionaries. How does Poor Talk impact your relationship with them? And just to even back up a step before that, could you share a good example of Poor Talk? Maybe something you've even seen or heard recently where somebody was doing Poor Talk. Give us an example, and then share this a little bit about how that can impact relationships between missionaries.
Absolutely. Well, it can definitely strain a relationship among missionaries whenever whenever people incorporate poor talk just into their general conversation. And recently, I was at a meeting and I heard one guy in ministry disparaging someone else for where they lived, and uh,
Hmm.
and this guy had no idea about all of the different ways that that other missionary was incorporating their home and doing a dozen different things out of their home. All they saw was just a building. They didn't see all of the dozen different activities that were taking place,
Hmm.
and how actually that was saving money by using that method. So it was just sad that it was such a narrow view of uh, of how to spend resources,
Right.
and so it just sometimes people just don't take the time to think about why people do what they do, and honestly, kind of it kind of reminds me of what Jesus said in the book of John. Whenever he answered, he said, um, I want you to follow me. Don't be concerned about what other people are doing. You know what's it to you? You follow me. And
Hmm.
John 21. So I uh, I just think sometimes people aren't they're so preoccupied in their own kind of way of thinking that they don't think that of other ways that are novel or beyond what they're doing.
Yeah. 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 That's a good example. And really that's sad to me as well, because I want to, at least personally, I want to have a posture of respecting that there are different ways or different roles people are called into being a part of the Great Commission, and I might not necessarily understand, all the reasoning and logic why someone might do things the way that they do, but when it, suddenly that shifts into a almost like a judgmental, kind of a harsh, negative perspective regarding how somebody's using the tools God has given them. I mean, I don't want to be there, and I would imagine that person that was saying that, if they had a slightly different perspective, they wouldn't be putting down their brothers and sisters that were using the home that they lived in for ministry purposes. It sounds as if they were purchased or rented, or were using a building really strategically, not just to live in, but for some missional purposes. But they couldn't see that, huh?
Absolutely, yeah, and we all have budgetary limitations.
Always.
Everybody has to work within a financial framework
Hmm.
based on their ministry goals and how much money they've raised. So everybody has to. Even Bill Gates has budgetary limitations on what his goals are,
Hmm.
and so but we're not talking about those limitations. It's more about, I guess, the heart. It's more about the attitude.
Right.
What we say and how we say it, that'll reflect so much more about our motivation and really our ultimate trust in God as our provider.
Yeah, yeah. This reminds me of an old article that Steve Shadrach wrote, and he said that poor talk poisons ministry morale, and that when people are focused on saving pennies at the grocery store, when they're more focused on that than they are to winning the world to Christ, they're losing sight of their vision. And so I can see. I guess yeah, I would hope that your hearers can hear and see as well, just that poor talk it's going to impact your relationship with other missionaries if we're all silently, or not silently in this case, judging each other regarding our finances all the time. But let's go ahead and shift from that, though, Tony, and do a little bit of a different perspective. Then, if someone is around other missionary types that's struggling with poor talk, they might not even realize that they're struggling with poor talk. How do you address that? How do you encourage people to stop that, like a bad habit?
Well, it's a delicate thing. You want to speak the truth in love in many ways, and it's just it's more of a time for just to ask questions and say, now what sort of goals do you have, and how can we put together a plan to meet those goals? And could I be of assistance to you in helping you think through how to raise some money? I was recently talking with a brother in the global South, and his approach to fundraising was in many ways it was just waiting till it was an emergency to ask for funds.
Hmm.
And and I don't know that he realized how that communicated to potential donors that he wasn't serious about his work.
Right.
And so I said, some of these expenses that you have are scheduled. They're coming.
Right.
What if we were to put together a portfolio, or if we put together a funding brief that you could send out in advance, and uh, and uh, and so that would appeal, especially to the culture of the donor. It would appeal to them in a much better way
Okay.
than the way instead of waiting till the end.
So you're saying if you're hearing somebody struggle with using poor talk, you're really seeing that as an indicator that they personally may not have ever had their funds, or at least not recently enough, had their funds in a healthy place, and that complaining or that downgrading of their finances, out loud. You seem to be indicating that's probably like a flag that they need some help, and it might be a
Yeah.
passive aggressive way of them publicly acknowledging that they need some help. Is that kind of what you're saying?
It, I think that can be one of the factors, and if it could also be another factor, just possibly the way that they were raised. I mean, if they were raised in a family where they weren't. I mean, it doesn't matter what it was. That maybe the mother and the father had a limited income, and they were raised in such a way that they were always just getting by as a
Hmm.
family growing up.
Hmm.
That's the environment they were raised in, and so naturally that'll just carry over into their ministry life and how they fundraise as well.
Okay. Okay. Good. Well, and you kind of, Tony, that kind of digs in on a little bit of a sensitive spot, I think, for some Christian workers, that their organization they are in might have a perspective that it's the opposite of the health and wealth gospel that you and I both just run from, but it's getting into a different ditch that being poor is more spiritual, like needing to beg for every meal. Those are the spiritual giants in the world, and it's kind of a different culture sometimes that exists. Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. Sometimes people come out of a family or a church that taught them that, but sometimes the organization that they're working with has that as its de facto posture. And boy, that's got to be a hard thing to interact with for you and others, isn't it?
It is, and sometimes we meet people on the field that are kind of have this that it's like a badge of honor to drive that old car. It's a badge of honor to be able to say that you have a limited budget. Um, um, but it's I think it just is it takes some grace on behalf of people that have a full budget that have raised their personal support. It just takes some grace just to show some deference to those other people, just to say that they're in process. They're working through some issues, and that's the way their organization maybe works, and hopefully you can be an encouragement to them that it doesn't have to necessarily be only one way. You can have some wins. You can have some success and raise not only your personal support but also your ministry budget as well.
Yeah, yeah. You're Tony. You're talking about talking with people, to people, and really, I think one of the ways to address poor talk, I think the strongest way probably is that relational thing. I mean, you have to have a maybe even a friendship. I would hope I can speak to to a topic honestly with someone, even if we weren't besties. But it sounds like to really dig in on when someone has kind of we'll call it a poisonous view of spirituality when it comes to poor talk and support raising. A lot of times going to win somebody to truth with just facts alone. There needs to be some love, and there needs to be some relationship. And uh, I imagine that in the many opportunities you get to engage with this, that you kind of have to pick your battles, don't you?
You do. I mean, sometimes, there's just so much built up inertia within an organization that it's just hard, and you have to try to talk to people on an individual basis. And I know, for example, I've been able to share just some examples of some things that I've done, like giving them here's a copy of my year end ask letter. Maybe
Mm.
some of the format I've had could be useful to you, and just kind of just sharing kind of what some of the tips you've learned, and they can individually incorporate those things into their support raising plan, even though they're not getting that organizational support.
Right, right. There is there's a tension there, and I just want to address it though, because I know that sometimes I don't want to always come off as the the answer man, the know it all, the you know the person who thinks they're always the best example, because that's not true. I know that I make mistakes. I know that I'm still learning, but I do appreciate when somebody's a good example to me. And a lot of topics, not just support raising, and I certainly learn from others to this day about how to better engage with this topic, and to think and to see other people's newsletters. But that's a fantastic idea there, Tony. But I just would caution our listeners. There's a bridge to build. Cross it. Don't avoid crossing it. but there is a bridge to build when it comes to engaging with a brother or sister that's in full time Christian ministry work. But the culture of the missions agency they're with promotes, if not rewards, a poor talk mentality. And that's an uphill battle. You're fighting a culture and a conversation. And Tony, recently I actually had a friend that's with an organization that will remain unnamed for the sake of this podcast, who he's been struggling, not because of his funding. His funding is actually healthy. I've seen his budget. We're close enough that he has shared with me about some things that are going on with his personal need for finances and their ministry and their family and where they live, and far, 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 far from being out of bounds. Very level-headed, sober budget. Yeah, he's surrounded in his organization that he serves with a culture of people that they don't do that. They don't embrace having a good plan and really having a strong team of people praying for them and supporting them financially as well. And he's actually in a interesting point right now where honestly, he almost doesn't want to talk about finances because he feels, I'm putting words in his mouth here, Tony, but I think he either feels like he's showing off, which that is not his heart at all. Or I think the flip side is he might feel like he's always telling everybody else, you are all doing it wrong. And he doesn't want to damage his relationships. But it's a tough tension when people are serving in a ministry organization that really has a challenge. We'll be graceful and call it that, a challenge at best theology to raising and living off support, as is evidence how they even talk about money. So I'm sure
So
you're seeing
true.
that quite a
You know,
bit.
yeah, and I was talking with a friend from Kenya many years ago, and he said, "Hey, can I ask you a question about fundraising?" And I said, "Sure." He said, "Where do you get your money from?" He said, "It seems to me all Americans have lots of money, but I don't know how they get it." Nobody had ever taken the time to explain to him the process of personal support raising,
Mm,
and so I think there's just with the way that, like Lausanne movement talks about, from everywhere to everywhere, and we have to be able to help our brothers and sisters, both from the West and from the global South,
yes.
have a healthy, open conversation about fundraising.
Yes.
And and so for so many years, it's been kind of taboo
Hmm.
to talk about finances.
Hmm.
And but the Lord of the harvest has given us and blessed us with every spiritual blessing, right?
Yeah.
And so we have so much to give, and we're blessed to be a blessing. So let's share what we're learning with each other,
Hmm.
and for ultimately for that kingdom impact.
If you get to help others as they're raising their support, a fair question to consider is who's helping you? Who's pouring into you and helping you increase your capacity and ability as a support raising leader, trainer, or coach? May I suggest that you be sure that you're a part of the SRS network because it can be a matter of access. Access to a discount to the Support Raising Leaders Conference, access to the online course SRS Foundations, and access to the SRS Network member resource page. The SRS Network is designed to resource you and connect you with others who are also trying to develop support raisers for the Great Commission. Make sure that you are a part of the SRS Network. This is a bit of a sidebar, but I'm glad you said that, Tony, because that opens up just a little bit of conversation here with the idea of taking the principles that they're out of the Bible, and the support raising solutions applies them in a way that we believe is very biblical, but also it's not just American. And I was training a support raising solutions boot camp in Asia a while back. I'm going to leave it at that. Asia is a very large place, but I had a lady, probably the bravest person in the room, stand up and question me, which I thought was fantastic because that wasn't necessarily her culture. Her culture was more of a type of the honor shame. You never question the teacher. You just listen to everything. And I had been engaging with that boot camp and saying, please, if there's anything you don't understand, or maybe even you think it's wrong or not biblical or whatever else, please ask questions. That would be being a good student. And they didn't believe me at first, but a while in, she was the brave one, and she stood up and she challenged me. And Tony, she said, we really thought that you were here to train us how to get money from Americans because only Americans support missions. And, it kind of broke my heart a little bit that she had been taught that and she thought that. But I also understood the culture she was coming out of. I understood why she might be thinking that. And she's still in that culture, by the way. It's not a broken culture. It's just a different culture from the U.S. And we were able to have a fantastic conversation because of her honesty that she was thinking that, and even bring up the idea of, hey, raising support, inviting brothers and sisters to be a part of the Great Commission with us. That is not an American idea. That is not something that we have come up with. That those of us who were born in the U.S. If that was the case, then that means Jesus and Paul were either Americans or they traveled to the U.S. to raise money before they started their ministry. And since the U.S. isn't even that old, we know that didn't happen. And so, there is sometimes there's kind of an education and an interaction with people. And yet we sometimes see that question behind the question, don't we?
Hmm. Yeah, no, you're right, and but I think it comes back to some just basic character qualities, just about not
Mm-hmm.
complaining and having trust and having faith that we ask God to provide, but do we trust that He
Yeah.
will, and do we have that resting faith that says we're gonna be
Yes.
faithful to do what God's
Yes.
asked us to do, uh, no matter where we live. Those
Mm-hmm.
principles relate to all of us.
Well, and even to brag on that lady who asked me that question later that day. My understanding is, and of course, I got this through an interpreter, but my understanding is later that day she did that very thing, Tony, and she sat down with a friend and she took a leap of faith and invited that friend to be a part of her prayer and financial support team, and she really was prepared for that good friend of hers to say, hey, you're a bad person. You're not supposed to ask people for money, like just like what Americans might fear, right? Like she was concerned about her friend's response, but she understood it, theologically and practically what she was doing. And when she invited that friend to join her team, she had a what she believed to be a real concern that her friend would, unfriend her, so to speak, in real life, not just on social media. And instead, her friend broke down in tears and said, "Thank you so much for inviting me. I have actually been asking God, how can I be a part of missions? I can't go anywhere, but I want to see the Great Commission move forward. I want unreached people groups to know the love of Jesus Christ. God, I have some money. Where would I even give it? Lord, I want to be." So her friend had been pleading to God to be a part of missions. And it took the lady that was in the SRS boot camp I was doing to learn and take a step of faith to invite one of her very best friends. It took that to actually engage that other lady in becoming a giver and becoming a partner in ministry. And so I realize that's slightly off topic with, quote unquote, poor talk, but not really, because if the
Yeah.
lady had kept listening to the idea of, oh, nobody would want to do this, I'm just a missionary, no one wants to give me money, no one wants to be a part of it, if she would have listened to those lies, she never would have been able to add her friend to her support team.
Yeah, and I don't know if you're like me, and but whenever I see those examples, I'm thinking of a lady that I was coaching. She was wanting to raise some funds to go to a conference, and this lady was very very poor and maybe only living on a few dollars a day. And I coached her on the principles, the God asked to pray and be thinking about who she could invite to help support her. And then out of the blue, people started coming up to her and said, I feel like God's asking me to invest in you and your ministry. And just for me to see that God is at work providing for her finances. It built
Mm,
my faith, and so she's trusting God for her support. And it's encouraging me in my walk with the Lord too, to see her becoming funded so that she could go on to her ministry assignment there and go to that meeting. So it shouldn't amaze me,
mm,
but it does when I see it again and again, and it gives me pause and to stop and say thank you God for doing what
yeah,
you say
yeah.
you would do. So
Well, there are some articles on the Support Raising Solutions blog. If people want a little more information and maybe even some more, bulleted point thoughts that they can bring this topic to others in their organization. There is an older article by Steve Shadrach called "Poor Talk: Is It Poisoning Your Ministry?" And then there's another reason. There's another article called "Five Reasons Poor Talk Is Killing Your Ministry," that I wrote really with off of some of the words and thoughts that you and I had, Tony, a couple of years back, and I guess that was 2017, so 3 years back. And so, listeners, if you're looking for a little more information and even some specific examples as to why poor talk is worth your time for rooting out and getting out of your ministry culture, I highly suggest you jump on the Support Raising Solutions blog and look up those articles. I think it would be a blessing as you really continue to process how to address really the insidious nature of poor talk, because it's something that can take root and cause all sorts of problems because it gets in our hearts, it gets in our heads, and well, then it comes out on our mouths. So before we wrap up this episode today, Tony, I want to come back to you and invite you to kind of give us a last thought, so to speak, when it comes to the topic of poor talk.
well, well, thanks, Aaron. And I just agree. I mean, it just kind of for me, it just comes back about an attitude and my attitude, and also the attitude of the person I'm observing, and so how am I going to respond to them when I observe poor talk? I think is as important as them responding with poor talk, and it can make and break that relationship, And so I want to try and reduce strain before it happens. And so how can I
Mm,
just be an encouragement and not come across as a know-it-all, kind of like you were saying you were wanting to avoid, but how can we come in as with a
mm,
response that's honoring to God and who is our ultimate provider. So it just takes some wisdom, and if you're around someone that's frequently using poor talk, just be in prayer, just just asking the Lord to help provide you with some scriptures or some words of encouragement that can
Hmm.
kind of turn it around. Because it's the good news is that they don't
Yeah.
have to be that way forever. It's you can change your words, you can change your speech, and ultimately that attitude it can be
Yeah. Yeah.
an
Good
encouragement to
word.
others.
Good word. Tony, thank you for joining us on the SRS podcast. I really appreciate you taking the time today.
Well, thank you, Aaron. It was a privilege
Yeah.
and good talking with you.
Thanks for joining us for this episode. We would love to hear your ideas for future content. Please visit supportraisingsolutions.org/feedback to share your thoughts and questions. Also, wherever you download your podcast from, be sure to subscribe for future episodes and come back each week to gain more insight into the process of building and maintaining your personal support team.